to today's In the Garden Facebook Live. I'd like to introduce myself, Maureen Thomas. I am your moderator and a Montgomery County Master Gardener 2022 intern. So I'm earning some of my 40 hours by volunteering to support this program. Today's gardening experts that will be joining us are Melissa Siegel, a Montgomery County Master Gardener since 2013, a board member, a past president, and a current volunteer with the Therapeutic Horticulture Program and the White Oak Community Center Children's Garden. In addition to volunteering for the gardening programs for children in public libraries, Melissa is also a very active member of several garden clubs where she volunteers with children's programs. Steve Dubik is our other expert on the screen today, and he is the coordinator of the Montgomery County Master Gardeners Program, in addition to a number of other hats that he wears. So he's our fearless leader, and we appreciate everything that he does for Montgomery County Master Gardeners. Before we start today's program, we'd like to remind you of a few of the services that Montgomery County Master Gardeners provide to our communities. We provide a speakers group, and that group can go out and speak at various garden clubs, with school programs, trying to spread the word and educate folks about just exactly what the Master Gardeners do. In addition, there's a demonstration garden. We're going to ask Steve some questions about that today. There's youth gardening programs, plant clinics, therapeutic horticulture, as we mentioned earlier, and Melissa would be a great person to reach out to about that. In addition to Grow It, Eat It, and other special events throughout the year. We host the monthly Ask a Master Gardener, both in person and on Facebook Live. For specific days, hours, and locations, please visit the Montgomery County Master Gardener website. So before we begin today's program, we'd like you to know that you're welcome to submit questions throughout this live broadcast, and we will save time at the end of today's program to answer those questions that we receive. You can enter your questions in the comment section of the Facebook Live presentation. Otherwise, please consider sending your questions for future programs to inthegardenwithmcmg@gmail.com. Again, that's inthegardenwithmcmg@gmail.com. Or you may call 301-590-2842 and leave a voicemail describing what the question is, but also adding your email address and follow-up number in case someone would like to reach out and get more information from you, probably ask you for some photos to better describe your problem. So first of all, we're going to ask Steve and Melissa to tell us a little bit about the wonderful demo garden that we have in the county. Many of you may not be aware of them. Steve said he was just there this morning, so he has a very fresh report for us on how the demo gardens are doing.
Sure, I can tell you that. Our demo garden is located on the Agricultural History Farm Park. That's in Durwood, Maryland. The address is 18410 Muncaster Road. And it's open throughout the year from dawn to dusk. The Master Gardeners are usually up there on Tuesday mornings working, and I was just chatting with some of them a little while ago. The garden looks great. There's a wide variety of different little niches within the garden, showing different types of gardening, raised beds in the ground, keyhole gardening, butterfly gardening. There's probably some other things up there too Melissa has seen and knows about, but you should come and check it out. And I don't know if Melissa wants to add in a little bit about it.
Great day trip for anybody looking for something to do, right, Melissa?
Yes, one of my favorite places in the garden is the therapeutic, our therapeutic garden, and that is for our program that we go into care homes and do gardening programs for the people who live there, and we raise the flowers that we use and the plants that we use. And I love it because it's always so bright and all kinds of flowers that we don't have in the other areas. Another place that I like is the vegetable garden, where you can see different kinds of tomatoes, different kinds of cucumbers that you don't normally see in the market when you go to buy them. So it's my favorite place in Durwood. It's the Durwood Demo Garden.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. Again, I want to remind folks to submit your questions in the chat, and we will hold all the questions till the end and save some time to answer them. Since our last program, we've received several questions, a number of questions that we're going to address today. So the very first question is about trellising vines. I'm going to ask Melissa to answer the question, and I'm going to share the question. It is a question about trellising squash and sugar sweet pumpkins. The plants are taking up too much space in my garden. What are your suggestions, Melissa, for types of inexpensive trellises to let them grow upwards instead of outwards?
So there are many inexpensive ways to grow the heavy pumpkins and squash vertically. The simplest way to grow squash upwards is to train them on a one-piece trellis that can be secured on a sun-facing wall or fence. Freestanding support, such as a homemade teepee, which we'll show you a picture of shortly, can also be used to train the vines upward. There's many videos online. They can show you how to do different kinds of things. Another way to grow vegetable vines up on the trellis is training the vines on the roof or pergola to create green roof or a shady porch in the summer. Trellises are a great way to grow vine crops. They save space, increase air circulation at the roots, increase sunlight access to the plants, and also make healthy fruits which are easy to harvest. The quality and appearance of fruit can also be improved. Unlike watermelons that grow on the ground, they always have a yellowish bottom touching the soil. And you can eliminate that, not with watermelons because they're too heavy, with fruits and vegetables. The side of the fruit that sits on the ground is often flat and slightly off-colored, and by growing the plant up, the fruit won't be resting on the ground and the blemishes can be avoided. Cucumbers will also grow straighter. This works best for smaller fruit, 3 pounds or less. If you're growing plants with larger fruit or melons, you may need to make hammocks or slings to support the fruit, and that's what we do in our community garden. A few ways to grow plants upward is by using cages. You can get them at nurseries and garden centers. They're used to train tomato vines and other small fruiting vines, and you can make your own with wood and wires or concrete reinforcing wires. You can use stakes. A variety of different objects can be used as stakes, such as wood, bamboo, T-posts, and rebar to support plants. Stakes are typically 5 to 6 feet tall, and wooden stakes should be at least 1 inch square. Depending on what you're growing, they may need to be taller, and plants can be grown on a single stake, or several stakes can be tied together to form a tripod or teepee that plants such as peas and pole beans can be trained to grow up. Some plants like peas and pole beans, they produce tendrils and they will attach themselves to the stakes. Other plants, such as tomatoes, will need to be tied to them. Another way of staking tomatoes is to use the stake and weave basket weave. This technique is useful if you're growing multiple types of tomato plants. Stakes are placed in the ground every 6 feet and plants are held in place between twine. Another great idea is using trellises. They're commonly used to grow vining crops, particularly cucurbits. Trellises typically have 2 vertical supports or stakes with some sort of netting and mesh, wood, bamboo, or string suspended in between them. Alternatively, stakes can be placed onto the ground at an angle to maximize the amount of sunlight a plant receives. Doing this will also allow the fruit to hang freely underneath the trellis, making them really easy to harvest. When building a trellis, the materials you use, their size, and how deeply you drive your stakes into the ground will depend largely on what you're trying to grow. Similar techniques can be used to grow vining berries and also ornamental plants.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, and many people have some bamboo in their garden, so using your advice and maybe harvesting some of their bamboo. Very good, thank you. Okay, the next question that we have is about cherry laurels. The question is, we have a couple of photos here. What is wrong with this cherry laurel? Are they dying? And I'm going to ask Steve if he could answer that question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, cherry laurels are problematic at times. There are a couple of things that probably we see quite often on cherry laurels. One of them is we get borers. We actually get a borer called the peach tree borer that gets onto there. It even attacks healthy plants. And so some of that damage, it occurs it's right at the soil line, maybe even slightly below the soil line, sometimes because we'll add mulch later to it. And you'll see sections or maybe an entire plant die. Other things we see cankers sometimes, and this is stress related. There's some insects that get on there. Not seeing any insects like this white scale called white Cunnicolia scale, but the cankers, the dieback, it's common on cherry laurels. So sometimes people get a little frustrated with cherry laurels and look to grow other plants. If you do have a peach tree borer, that is something you could potentially manage with the use of insecticides, but also use of biologicals. Like we have some nematodes, insectivorous nematodes that could be, when properly applied, could may remedy the situation. If it is a canker, and that's what it looks like more in this photograph, to be honest, is you just want to prune out the affected area and promote growth. We don't want to use that piece of branch to serve as essentially a food reservoir for the fungus to kind of grow farther back into the plant and cause more, potentially more issues. So pruning out, trying to maintain the plant vigor is probably all you can do right now. But check for borers. The other thing you can see for borers, sometimes you'll see a little hole about the diameter of a pencil lead. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of their excrement we call frass. You might even see a little pupal skin. If you do have borers, then you may want to manage for that. And I guess good luck. So hopefully they'll come through.
Thank you very much, Steve. Now we're going to move on to the next question, which is about Japanese knotweed. So we have a question from one of our viewers, local gardeners. The question reads, I am a new homeowner. I recently found Japanese knotweed growing around my home, 2 to 3 feet high. I eradicated one from the root, hoping it wouldn't come back, but I need help in eradicating the others. If your team can assist, I would be very grateful. So the question is what to do about knotweed. So Japanese knotweed is considered an invasive. It's best to pull it out by the root. If you were to mow it with a lawnmower, you would actually help spread it because the little pieces that fall off will reroot. It emerges in the spring, usually April or May, and it forms dense thickets that shade the soil and block native plants' access to light. So the other thing that's interesting to know about knotweed is that it is actually edible. It is not toxic. It is eaten by folks who like to use edible plants, make things such as knotweed crumble and even beer. And it's supposed to have some impressive life extending and anti-aging properties, if you believe the marketers. So anything else, Steve, that we might want to mention about it?
Well, just one thing is just how big this plant is. Sometimes when we hear knotweed, we think of a lawn knotweed or the knotweed we see growing in the sidewalk, which is very flat, the taproot, very, very low. This is quite large, 2, 3 feet, maybe more. It's really, and the stem kind of looks like bamboo. And it's kind of ornamental looking. That's probably how it got here to begin with. Somebody brought it in, thought it might have looked nice, but it's gotten to be really problematic for us now.
Yes, there is some information on the University of Maryland Extension site if anyone wants to research it further. And it can grow up to 10 feet high. It's shrubby and its leaves can be up to 6 inches long. So it's, to your point, it's not a standard weed. More like a shrub. Okay, moving on to the next one. Our next question is about milkweed, a little bit more a native weed that we all are fond of. And Melissa, I thought maybe I'd ask you to answer this one. The question is, why are my milkweed leaves shriveling up? It's only a few plants, but I'm worried something is wrong.
Well, I'm so glad you asked this because this is something that I grow a lot of. I raise butterflies, monarch butterflies, and I've done that for the past 5 years. And I had the same thing happen in two of my plants. I've got many plants, but it only happened in two, and I couldn't figure out what it was, so I went to work studying it. Your milkweed plants are suffering from an abiotic problem. It's an environmental issue rather than a biotic problem, a disease or insect infestation. One clue that a problem is abiotic is it affects only a few plants rather than all plants of a species. If your plants are swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, make sure they're receiving enough water. If they're common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, the larger leaves, make sure they're located on a site with good drainage. A plant experiencing drought or flooding is stressed, and it displays its stress in its leaves. The crinkling or shriveling of the leaves may also indicate herbicide damage from herbicides applied in your garden on your lawn or drifting over from your neighbor's gardens. So don't worry about it. I didn't, and everything's fine.
Great, thank you very much. There's another question related to milkweed. So if you could, I'd love to ask if you could answer this one too, Melissa. What are the orange spots on my milkweed? Is that that looks like that's another culprit? How do I get rid of it?
Well, thank you for those pictures. They're fabulous. And I wish I had taken pictures of mine when it happened this year for the first time. The orange spots on your milkweeds are oleander aphids, and they're common and non-native milkweed pests. Oleander aphids feed on oleanders, vinca, and milkweeds by sucking sap from the stems and the leaves. Note that the number of aphids should decline as the growing season moves along and plants are no longer putting out a lot of new growth. So I've done two things. You can try to spray them off with water, but really the best thing that I have found is using ladybugs. You can find them at many garden stores. You can order them online. And what I did is I ordered a container. I think there were like 500 in the container, and I put them in a dark space down on the ground, and I watered my plants, put them down about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the next morning I came out and many of them were gone. It took a few days, but all of them were gone. And the ladybugs, what they do is they get on the plant and they pump the liquid out of the aphids, which is like a milky sweet sap, and they're very, very happy. And then once it's done, the ladybugs move on to their next yard, not mine anymore. But that's what I do, and it works really well.
Great, wonderful. Okay, we're moving on to boxwood bushes. Question number 6 about boxwood. And Steve, if you would be so kind as to help us out with this one. The question is, we have some photos, and the question is, what is wrong with my boxwood? Why are they producing two different color leaves? One is a boxwood and one is a euonymus.
Yeah, we've got a couple of pictures here. The initial pictures are showing a boxwood, and we have a picture towards the end showing euonymus. But what they both have in common is both the plant, the original plant that probably the person put in the ground, purchased, was variegated. It is multicolored. Other than being green, it was green or yellow, green and white. So the boxwood originally a green and white cultivar, might be, I think it's called Elegantissima, but it started to change back. So we call this change back, we call it reversion. So it was reverting back to the original form, or something maybe closer towards the species. Often this green form is more aggressive than the variegated form, and it may eventually take over. We see this on a number of different plants, and particularly the euonymus, which is maybe probably the last picture we'll show you. That happens very, very commonly. So what should you do? Most people, they purchase the plant because they like the colorful foliage. So once you start seeing this green shoot come out, prune it out, and that's really it. cases like the boxwood, probably I'll have to do that maybe once or twice. Some plants are a little more problematic. You might have to follow up a few times, once or twice a year to avoid these reverting green shoots. So it's a normal kind of common occurrence. It's just the plant trying to kind of regroup and go back to its original form.
Steve took us to on a field trip from our class, took us to the Arboretum, the National Arboretum in DC, and we were walking by a tree that had reversion, and it was very cool because it was very different than the rest of the tree, and I thought it looked really beautiful. So if you want to see it, see something like that, you can go to the Arboretum. I think it's in a couple of the trees.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the next question, which is about oak tree leaves. We have a couple of photos here, and I'll go ahead and answer this question, but feel free, folks, to jump in. The question here is, what is wrong with my oak leaves? Should I worry about it? And the answer, the short answer, is oak leaf skeletonizer. So basically, that is a common native species that feeds on the leaves of oaks and chestnuts, but shows a preference for the red oak. And it occurs from southern Canada and the lake states all the way to North Carolina and as far west as Mississippi. As a result of the feeding of the larvae, the oak leaves are reduced to their upper surface only, often becoming almost translucent and eventually drying out. Populations of oak skeletonizers vary greatly from year to year, depending on the natural factors like predators, parasites, and weather that have a strong influence on their population. Damage might be slight, even go unnoticed, except in outbreak years. Occasional outbreaks can cause damage over large areas, and then several successive defoliations would result in the reduction of tree growth and perhaps part of the ground kill. The adults are moths, and they have a wingspan of 7 to 8 millimeters. The forewing is blackish with some paler areas on them. The larvae are yellowish green, and when they're mature, they're about 5 to 6 millimeters in length. Small white patches of silk are often seen on the leaves when these insects are present. The best way to deal with them is with an herbicide, and I guess it looks like the best time of year is probably in the spring, so that you can catch the first generation in late April, May, when they're depositing their eggs on the underside of the oak leaves. Anybody else want to comment on this?
Yeah, the oak leaf skeletonizer, it's a common little pest we see on the oaks. It usually doesn't warrant control, but sometimes you'll get a little hot spot. Every now and then there'll be a little area where they're ganging up on a section of the tree occasionally, but often they're kind of diffuse. And so it may warrant chemical control or additional control, but often it's just something, particularly if you get a young new tree, a lot of people are going to say, what's going on here? So you'll see it on the underside.
And it looks like if you miss or want to do a second herbicide, again, only if it's really necessary and it really affects the health of the tree, then perhaps early August might be a good time. So we're coming up on that in the next few weeks. Okay, that is oak skeletonizer. So the next question we have is about a volunteer squash plant submitted by Leanne. We have 2 photos. Melissa, would you like to answer this question?
Sure.
Okay, and the question is, and thank you very much, Leanne, for the detailed photos. The question is, I have a volunteer squash plant in my vegetable garden that my picture this app identified as a crookneck squash, despite the fact that it looks like a watermelon. According to some sources, the fruit of squash volunteers is toxic. Is this true? So go ahead with that, Melissa.
Okay, so it's not poisonous, but it is bad for you, and it's going to make you a little sick. It may be reverting back to its original form. Do a taste test first. You're right to be cautious with the fruit from this type of volunteer. Vine crops, including cucumbers and zucchini, produce chemicals called cucurbitacins. It's hard for me to say this, cucurbitacins, which give a better taste to fruit. In cultivated cucumbers and zucchini, these chemicals are normally in concentrations that we can't taste. Wild cucurbits contain much higher levels of the cucurbitacins, making them inedible to mammals. Mild bitterness in zucchinis or cucumbers is not uncommon, and it can be caused by environmental stress like high temperatures, drought, wide swings in temperatures, or uneven watering practices that tend to concentrate in the fruit. This mild bitterness in garden squash or cucumbers may not be so severe as to prevent gardeners from using the fruit. With a mild bitterness due to environmental conditions, you would expect all plants in the garden to show the same problem to some extent, since they're all faced with the same environmental stresses. But with improved growing conditions, the problem should diminish. Sometimes gardeners pick zucchini from their gardens that are extremely bitter. If this happens, don't eat it. A couple of grams of this extremely bitter squash can cause the runs and stomach cramps, and it can last up to 3 days, but it is not poisonous.
Thank you.
The bottom line is if you have a different type of fruit in your garden than expected, don't eat it if it's extremely bitter. Spit out the first bite. And no deaths have ever been reported.
Honestly, I find the volunteer squash plants sometimes are even reverting. Some of them look more like gourds, and so I use those for decorative purposes only. I don't even think about eating them. In the fall, they make lovely displays in baskets, window boxes, pots. So anytime I find something like that, I just, use it for decoration.
That's a great
Avoid the problem.
That's a great way to use them.
All right, we have another question about. Well, earlier Melissa talked a little bit about trellising tomatoes, but so we now have a question specifically about brandywine tomato plant spots on leaves. And this question was submitted by Leanne. Steve, if you could take this question, we have a couple of photos. And the question is, I understand that heirloom tomato plants like the brandywine variety growing in my garden can be more susceptible to certain diseases, and I'm concerned that my plant has come down with one of them. Or is this a fungal issue? Some of the leaves have developed dark spots edged with yellow. I've removed the affected foliage, but is there anything else short of pulling the plant that I can do?
It's a really good question. We grow a lot of heirloom varieties nowadays because of the taste. But one of the downsides, not always all heirloom varieties, some of these heirloom varieties may be more problematic to disease, whether they're diseases with the root system, soil-borne diseases, or foliar diseases, as this case. So we've got a really nice picture. The picture shows symptoms that are kind of really kind of spot on for early blight, which is a problematic leaf spot disease that gets on our tomatoes. So you can kind of avoid the problem a little bit by getting earlier different varieties that are more resistant, but then again, you may not, have the flavor. Some of these tomato varieties are very interesting in color, size, and shape, and things like that. So one of the things to do is make sure you space them far enough apart, and make sure you don't purchase a plant that has any issues with it. A lot of the leaf spots start down at the bottom of the plant. Generally, a lot of diseases start at the bottom of the plant for a couple of reasons. One, it's usually more cooler and more humid down there, and then it kind of tracks its way upwards. So, and I think Leanne was mentioned, she's removing the leaves, the blighted leaves, so that way to sort of minimize the fungal spores from spreading up the plant. So try to minimize them splashing onto the plant. You put a light little mulch layer underneath, reducing the spores from splashing up, remove any of the debris. And if there's any really badly infected plants, maybe eliminate that one. You could use a systemic or an organic fungicide. There's some that are out there labeled for it, but it's not for everybody. But there are options along that way. But at the end of the year, what you want to do is you want to take this plant debris and you want to compost it or hot compost it, which want to get warmer temperatures to try to reduce the amount of fungal tissue or spores or what we call inoculum for next year. So it'll be hopefully less problematic. And it varies from year to year. This year might be just just the way the cards are dealt, a little bit worse than the year before. Someone has to do it for weather patterns, but good air circulation, good spacing, sanitation. I think it's a great place to start off with.
Wow, Steve, that comment about making sure that you gather up that plant and compost it or hot compost it so that you don't carry that issue into the next year is really valuable as well. So we'll all have to think about that this fall when we're cleaning up our garden. Okay, question the 11th number 11. Question number 11 is, what is milkweed vine? Again, submitted by Leanne. And Melissa, would you like to answer this question?
Yes.
Looks like we have one photo. And the question is, my picture, this plant app identified this volunteer plant in my garden as milkweed vine. Is that correct? And if so, is the vine related to milkweed plants? Can it serve as a host plant for the monarch butterfly? It seems fairly invasive, and I have been pulling it because it's strangling my blueberry shrub.
So it is milkweed vine, and to confirm it, check the leaves and see if they're opposite one another on either side of the stem and that the flowers are white. If the flowers are pink, purple, or burgundy, the plant may be a black swallowwort or pale swallowwort, which is invasive. Milkweed vine has several common names, including honey vine milkweed, sand vine, and blue vine. It's in the milkweed family and is related to other milkweeds. Milkweed vine provides nectar for monarch butterflies and is also a host plant. Milkweed vine grows aggressively with seeds that are easily dispersed by the wind. As a milkweed, it's a source of food for monarch butterflies, although it's not considered as good as Asclepias species. Native bees also use it as a source of pollen. The honey vine milkweed is a difficult weed to control, as you are finding. Once it's mature, few chemicals work well. It often climbs in shrubs where the green pods can be hard to spot. Usually the pods are noticed in winter after they've turned brown and popped open to spread their seeds far and wide. So just keeping a good check on it, make sure you're pulling them when you need to. It's still a good plant for the butterflies.
Thank you very much. We're at the conclusion now of our question session. So I'd like to ask if this is your last opportunity today to submit a question before we move on. So if you haven't submitted one yet, please do. And I'm going to check in with Bev, see if we have any questions.
No, we don't have any questions today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'd just like to remind you that when you're watching In the Garden Facebook Live, it's a monthly program. Please consider sending a question in the garden with mcmg@gmail.com or call 301-590-2842 and leave a voicemail including your email address. Please enter as much detail as possible, and if you're emailing, please include photos, as they are very helpful in researching the issue affecting your plant. The next session of In the Garden is scheduled for Tuesday, August 2nd. Please mark your calendars now, and we hope you will join us. If you have any questions you'd like to submit for that program, they must be received by Tuesday, July 26th at 6 p.m. We will make every effort to answer your questions on air, but if we run out of time, we will provide an answer by email. So I'd like to thank Stephen and also Melissa for being participants today as our in-house experts and answering all our wonderful questions that have been prepared by our behind-the-scenes team, which includes Mary Barnhart, Montgomery County Master Gardener ITG lead, and our research team for this week was Mohar, Sheila, Deborah, Christine, Howard, Heather, and Mary. So thank you all for your hard work and preparation for today's program. We'd like to remind you that we have some upcoming additional programs. We have, in addition to the August 2nd In the Garden program, that will be about the Montgomery County USO demo garden in Bethesda. So that's the topic for the In the Garden August 2nd. We have other In the Garden sessions around the county, so please check our website. Our next special event is our booth at the Montgomery County Fair, which starts on August 12th through the 20th. Steve, you know where that, or Melissa, do you want to answer that question? What are we going to be doing at the fair? Where will they find us?
Well, I'll let Steve answer that, but I will tell you that I'm going to bring my monarch butterfly larva caterpillars to the demo garden, which we have at the fair, and you can see the whole process. I'll probably have some chrysalises
Wonderful.
by then, and it'll be wonderful.
Excellent. Steve, did you want to say anything else about the Montgomery County Fair?
Well, you can find our garden. It's right next to Old McDonald's Farm, and it's not too far away from I guess it's what they call the Big Cheese. Right near there. Right near there.
Exciting. Okay. Oh, it's a wonderful annual tradition, and we hope to see you all up there. Please stop by and say hello. In addition, we wanted to get something on your calendars early. It's called the Holy Cross Hospital, Montgomery College, and Montgomery County Community Montgomery County Master Gardeners program that will be held on September 19th from 10 to 2 at the Holy Cross Hospital in Germantown on their outdoor plaza. And it's called the Community Garden Grow It and Eat It event. So again, that's September 19th from 10 to 2, family-oriented event. More information will be available next month.
Oh, Maureen, I'm just going to jump in there. It's September 17th.
I'm sorry, September 17th. Thank you. Yes, I was meant to fix that. It's on a Saturday from 10 to 2, September 7th. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we will see you again soon, right here on Facebook in the garden.